All right, so welcome to Southern Steve. I am Isaiah Webster, and I'm being joined for the very first time by Vrushab Shah. If you listened to last week's episode, or the first one of the season, you know that there's 6 co-hosts for this podcast, and Vru and I are just 2 of the 6th. And so we wanted to have like a voice, quote unquote, for all episodes. And so we chose Vrushab. So we hope you find that voice soothing because it's the one you're going to hear for the next 18 episodes.
If anyone from a meditation app is listening, I'm here for my services.
So season 1 versus season 2. So when we did this podcast last year, Vru, we really were focused on introducing this concept to CBOs, to community, to people who didn't know a whole lot about NASDAQ. And we had a lot of fun. And we, at the end of the season, we realized that there was a lot of folks that we didn't include that we wanted to speak to. So 2 of the areas that we really struggled in season 1, in my opinion, was there weren't a lot of men and there weren't a lot of people from rural communities. And not that we didn't want to include them, it's just not the way that it shook out. And so part of the reason why we have the guests we have today is to begin to kind of fill in some of the blank spaces that we didn't actually get to hit upon in the first season. So season 2 is kind of like an intentional lean into rural spaces and just a more diverse group of voices within this space.
I really can't wait to see who we pull together.
All right, so let's get into it. So I'm very excited because today's guest is a mentor, a former boss, maybe a friend. I'll ask him if he considers me a friend. But we have with us today Claude Martin. He is the Chief Executive Officer for Acadiana Cares in Lafayette, Louisiana. And Acadiana Cares is a client-centered organization dedicated to empowering vulnerable communities affected by HIV and AIDS. It also addresses inequities in healthcare, homelessness, and substance use issues that change the lives of people that are living with HIV or at risk of living with HIV by embracing a holistic approach to a healthy and self-determined life. So, Claude, welcome to Southern Steve. How are you?
I'm good. Excited to see you, my friend.
I love it. So, Claude, I believe it was 2001 that you hired me to be the empowerment coordinator for CARES. I know you don't remember the year, but I think it was around there.
Yeah.
First, why did you, how crazy can you be to hire me? And secondly, what do you remember about empowerment and about, me beginning this work? Because that was really the beginning of me doing HIV work.
Well, I think you were actually the first empowerment coordinator, weren't you? Yeah, and it was a pretty big deal for us too to do that. I think it was pretty progressive. We even went to the state and asked them to fund this program that I'd come across, and they wouldn't fund it. And so we went to, God, now I can't remember. He's a guy that made a bunch of money off of some .com thing that he did, that he was funding gay things in Colorado Springs, Colorado, did a bunch of stuff, but we wrote a grant and asked them to fund it. And so they agreed to do it. And so we were able to hire you. And then once you were doing it and did such a great job of it, the state then wanted to fund them in everywhere. So it was like part of you doing such a great job and implementing that program got the state to then come up with the funding to be able to offer it to other regions too. But I mean, how could we not have hired you in Lafayette? I mean,
We'll get to Lafayette because I think that Claude's he's talking about something else there. I think it was the Gill Foundation. Am I
Gill,
misremembering?
Right, exactly. That's who it was. Yeah, sorry. The Gill Foundation. Greg?
Yeah. And so for those of you unfamiliar with Empowerment Project, it was a community level interventions really designed to attract gay men, younger gay men in particular, to get them to have conversations with themselves and with their community about HIV, STDs, what was impacting their lives. And it was one of the first interventions that I worked on that didn't really center HIV. And by that, I mean, it was really more about what was important to them and what was going on in their lives. And obviously, we were trying to prevent HIV, and that was a part of it. But what drew them in were the events that we would have that were not necessarily leading with HIV. It was leading with, we're a community. We're trying to develop kind of like a social network, if you will. Remember, this was before all of the apps and before all of the Facebooks and all of that stuff. And so it really was a different time. But I had a lot of fun, Claude, and working at Cares really was eye-opening because I got to work with people from all walks of life. As you know, I got to learn about, the community that you still work with there in what we call Acadiana, because I'm from Louisiana as well. And so it could not have been a better start in terms of understanding why this work is this work and why we want to do it. Because I feel like I always tell people, Claude, that, if you want to have a career in HIV, start as an outreach worker, or start as someone who does testing, or start as someone who has some type of frontline interface with clients, because it is the best education you can ever really get, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it does give you a perspective of what's really out there and what the essence of the work is really about, is connecting with those individuals face to face.
Before we get into Cares in particular, can we talk a little bit about you and how and why you got into this work? So you've been in your current role for more than 2 decades. Before I get to that longevity, how and why did you get into this work to begin with?
Well, on a personal level, I was getting clean and sober in 1984. And so kind of waking up and looking at what was going on, and people started getting sick, and I started seeing people in our 12-step rooms. People were coming to groups and stuff and were sick, and they were coming back from major cities and stuff. So I, in looking at what I want, I was really doing deciding what I was going to do with my life or where I was or whatever at that point early on in my recovery. And so this just kept coming up to me that this was something that I needed to get involved with. And I went to we were already starting Cares, but the big thing that worked as a catalyst for me was I went up to New York and saw the original production of The Normal Heart at the Public Theater. And it just rocked me as far as my foundation. And so I came back and I was on fire with, after seeing that play and stuff, and really committed to the work after seeing that. It was, for me, seeing art that transformed someone, and as a result, we actually took us 2 years, but 2 to 3 years after I saw it in New York, we ended up putting the play on in Lafayette, which was very in Lafayette in 1987 for men to be kissing on stage and stuff was a really cute. My mother and father were coming to the play. I was in the play and I had the kissing scene, and my little brother with his new lover were double dating with my mother and father. And after the play, my little brother says, "Girl, Miss Thing, I'd never thought I'd be double dating with mom and dad to go see my oldest brother suck face with another guy in Lafayette, Louisiana." But as a result, anyway, but that play really worked the same way it did for me, in that this art transformed our community and we had this really robust response. The show sold out every night. We ended up putting it on a second time, but that actually, everything we had tried to do up to that point we really couldn't get the community moved or involved in the larger community. And we did that play, and it suddenly gave everybody permission to really get involved and to start doing the work and wanting to do the work in Lafayette. And for me, that was all volunteer stuff. And I kept doing the volunteer work and involved with CARES. And then at some point I decided to go back to school, and I went back and got my master's in rehabilitation counseling, but focused on as a life interrupting event for rehab was HIV at the time. So it was in the 90s. And I used HIV as what you would rehab someone from, is to help them put their life back together after an HIV diagnosis. And so I got that at the university. And then this job, which is what I had wanted to do for quite a while, came up about 2 years after I finished my graduate degree. And I applied for the job and got the job. And so I've been working here ever since.
So anyone in that part of the state who knows anything about HIV knows Claude Martin. You are kind of like really well known for the work you've done. And I think you've been in your role now since 1998, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Did you ever think about doing something else, or has this been firmly your life's work? Well,
I did. I had a business. I was self-employed for the 20 years before I did that. I'm old. And I had a tropical plant business and landscaping business for
I love
years
that.
before I did this. So when I took this job, I still owned the business, and I kept ownership of the business for the first year that I was employed to make sure that it was going to work. And then I sold the business after I'd been here for a year.
I had totally forgotten about that. I had forgotten you were such a green thumb.
And old.
I think that's the most beautiful part of your entire story too.
So before I turn it over to Baru, he's going to talk to you about management and longevity and leadership. Let's talk about CARES for a second. How many employees now? What's the focus of the work currently? And is CARES still an acronym, or have y'all done away with that and just go by, CARES?
Yeah, we've done away with it as far as presenting it to the public. But it's still legally, we have not changed the name for the acronym of Concern for AIDS, Education, Research, and Support, just because so many of the grants and all the work that it takes to change your legal name, we just haven't done it. So it's still legally it's an acronym, but officially it's just one big word.
And then what's the focus of the work that you all are doing now? So
the core of our work and what drives us still is HIV and the communities that are affected by that. What we've done in the last 15 years is started looking at, prevention and really saying, what can we do more than just talking to people and telling them to wear a condom and testing people and stuff. So we 15 years ago looked at what populations were most affected by HIV. So homeless population, substance use, those were areas that we decided to start to expand our reach in, and felt like if we could start to intervene before or help someone get sober and stable, or house them and get them stable, that they were less likely to be at risk for HIV. So we started building these programs around that concept. And so we now have a pretty robust, when we looked at that back 15 years ago, we had a housing program that was about $100,000. Today it's $1.2 million. Same thing, we had some counseling that we did for substance users. Now we have a residential 36-bed licensed facility for substance use treatment, and we are doing construction right now to open a medical detox and inpatient facility, so that we will be able to provide from the beginning of a continuum of care in substance use from the very beginning to the exit, because we have an outpatient program too. And all of that, the thing that's so important about that here, and what we fold into all of that, is this non-judgment approach to things, so that our people will have places to go that they're accepted for who they are. And the reason we did the substance abuse program was I kept seeing people that were coming out of regular traditional treatment programs, and they were never talking about their HIV status. I mean, the programs were either telling people, we can take that up one-on-one, but we don't need to bring it up in group because it may upset people. So people that were dealing with one of the biggest stressors in their lives were going through this treatment program and never really developing or being able to talk about the biggest stressor in their lives. So that was really what pushed us to open a substance abuse program. Specifically, we started it for people with HIV, and it kind of expanded into a much bigger program. But it is focused on, and we've gotten a reputation in Louisiana for being very accepting to people living with HIV, or people, LGBT people, non-traditional individuals. And we, get people that work offshore that come into our facility too. And one of the things that has worked, and it's wonderful in the program, is that people living with HIV are able to begin to develop what I call a language of their own to talk about their status, and to do it with people that are not so much a member of their tribe, but the general public, so that they begin to stigmatize, but also remove the power that their status or their diagnosis had over their lives, because they've learned how to start to process it and talk about it. They've gotten reactions from people. They've learned how to respond to those reactions and process and stuff. So it's been a really, I think it's an important part of that process for people that are living with HIV that want to get into recovery, to have a place for them to start to build that kind of foundation with. It's very similar to the same thing with our housing program. We have specialized in, our people living with HIV, but we also provide housing for the general population too. So part of what we've done in the HUD funding that comes to this area is that we've been very proactive about making sure that we secure a piece of the pie that comes here specifically for people with HIV, so that we work really hard to keep that piece of pie in the funding stream and in the 5-year plans or the 10-year plans for our community, to be able to continue to get that funding to make sure that our clients are being taken care of too. We also, I don't know if you know this, Isaiah, but about 5 years ago, we opened a clinic. So we now have primary care, we have HIV specialty care and mental health care. A couple of months ago, we bought a new piece of property a couple of blocks from here that's on Willow, which is a main thoroughfare in Lafayette, and we'll be moving all of the clinics work over there to the new location, which we're excited about, so that we can then also start to integrate harm reduction models for substance abuse stuff. We couldn't really do it here on site since we have an abstinence-based program. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to have down the sidewalk, a needle exchange or Suboxone or something. Somebody say, well, I could go, I like this program down the sidewalk.
Did you say that you're running Claude Martin is running an abstinence program?
Yeah, well, abstinence-based for substance abuse.
Oh, I see that. So I want to get Rushab's voice into this space, but we're going to come back and have a much longer conversation about Lafayette, because I want, you're the perfect person to draw a mental picture for people on what that part of the country is like, but we'll come back to that.
Oh, I can't wait to hear now. Well, I wanted to shift us into some talking points about kind of leadership and management longevity. So, how has for you, Claude, working in the HIV kind of workforce evolved over the years? And kind of what are the critical lessons that you've learned for younger CVO leaders in the South?
Well, so probably for one of the things that I've tried to do here is that is to look at ways that we can fund programs and fund our core mission without relying on fundraisers, because we're never going to be able to do the kind of work that we've expanded into doing, relying on the traditional kind of nonprofit fundraising stuff. So we've really looked at creating programs that generate and create income for us, that then we're able to take that income or those profits and move them into programs or start programs as seed money. And then the expectation is, as we start these other programs, they will be able to be self-sufficient on their own, or they will at some point be able to support other programs. So some of the ways that we've done that is that here in Lafayette, there was a nursing home corporation that was looking to donate. They built a new facility and they wanted to donate their old facility to a nonprofit. So we got, really involved and tried to move to get that position. And so we were able to secure it. So we were given a 5-acre, 76,000 square foot facility that most people thought we were crazy, like, I can't believe they've taken that, in that neighborhood, oh Lord, and stuff. But so we, looked at it and took it on, and we have developed the whole property now. When we got it, I was all excited because I said, oh, finally, now we have something the bank can take away from us. So now I can, negotiate with them for a bigger line of credit. And they were like, oh, well, I don't know if that's valuable or anything. Now they bring their corporate executives to our place to show them what we've created with this donation that we got. And we have about 80 people that live on the property. Here locally, we have about 65 people that work for CARES here at this spot. And then we have a larger contract that we have with the state of Louisiana, that we have another 90 employees that work within that larger contract. And that is one of the things that we've done too, is that a lot of the work, so we make an administration fee off of doing some of this administration work that we do, that then creates income that we're able to fold back into the local work that we do too.
Interesting. Wow. I need to see photos of this now. This sounds like the place to be in town.
So we've gotten two more nursing homes too. So we have this pretty large real estate portfolio that has tenants in it that are renting the property from us. And so that money is money that we raise to be able to do the stuff that we do as far as our core mission work goes. So we've looked at developing those donations into income producing real estate.
So you kind of touched on, I was going to talk to you about sustainability and how an organization like this does it, but you really went through the details of walking us through that. So I actually now want to ask you about something you talked about earlier, which was your housing program. You established that recently over the last, 5-ish years. It was a bigger focus. So, and are there any best practices that you're able to share with our audience on how you established that program and how you've kept it going?
What I did, and what everybody needs to do, is they need to get involved with their planning councils. So every city has a community development program, and HUD, every city gets HUD money. And so they have to come up with a 5-year plan of how they're going to address housing needs or infrastructure needs. And if you have to get into that process and advocate and bring evidence to them that there is a need for housing for people with HIV. And so are people with substance issues or women or whatever. And you have to get into those plans. And then once you're in that plan, and it's, that this is something that the community will address, then all the funding that comes up, you then have the evidence when you apply for that money to be able to, they have to fund you because it's built into their plan that they have to address these needs that are in the plan for their municipality.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted to kind of just say, Claude, it seems to me that housing is just not always, quote unquote, the sexy thing to do for these CBOs. Like, folks want to do social marketing campaigns, they want to do other things, but for whatever reason, in my experience, and this is, I don't know how you and Veru feel about this, it feels like to me that housing is never the sexy program to propose, but the ones that are successful have been developed in just the way that you described. And maybe it's people don't have that know-how, they just don't have that they don't understand how it works in such an intricate way. But I have noticed that CBOs seem to shy away from housing for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, to me, there's two things that happen when you do that too, is that you can acquire assets. So then you become much more bankable to where your banker and your legitimacy is much stronger. So if, we have a huge need for cash flow. And so if I go to the bank and say I need $2 million worth of a line of credit, they want to know what they can take away from you, if we default on the loan. And so you have something that they can put their hands on. So it's an ability for you to then finance, and also finance for other building the program or expanding programs, because you have assets and stuff. The thing about housing too is that it is when we started really looking at it, our big slogan was housing is healthcare, because you can't expect back then, the protocols, the medications people were taking. I mean, it was 8-10 times a day you had to take medications before a meal, after a meal. It had to be chilled. It had to be you had to have a house to live in. And if you didn't have a place to stay that was permanent, you couldn't even follow the drug regimen programs that people had. So, I mean, that was one of our big things, was that this is healthcare. Now we know that it's the most effective way to immediately stabilize someone. So, if your life is stable, you're less likely, to do lots of things that can get you in lots of trouble.
Yeah. The list is long, Claude.
Yes,
the list is long.
And I mean, it's simple stuff like that. If you don't have stable housing, then, the choices and the decisions you're making about where you're sleeping tonight or who you're sleeping with tonight so that you have a place to sleep, become very, primary decisions or primary things in your life that most people don't understand those kind of choices.
Right. You're surviving day to day.
Yes.
You're thinking about what you're going to make it a need to do to get to the next day. Right. I hear you. And so I want to now really hear from you about, I guess, your leadership personally. So what for you, Claude, continues to drive you to do this work after all of these years?
Well, for me, it is from the beginning. I am blown away coming to work every day still, that I get to walk around and see what has happened and what has been built from a bunch of people getting together to care for the people that they loved. So I know what this place looked like. We were working out of our cars. Our case management program at one time, we were working out of the trunks of our cars and handing out pamphlets and going to visit people. And it was all before we even had our first paid employee. The prevention department was handing out condoms, but it was an answering a service that would take calls from 10 to 2 and send them to somebody's house to answer the calls. And so I walk around now and see what this infrastructure is, what we've built from that kind of concern and interest in our community. And, I get giddy over it, but we have staff today that are complaining that they have to share a room with somebody, and I go, I can remember when we had one computer for everybody in the whole damn agency. And now everybody has their own computer. But
we have come a long way.
Yes. And the beauty of that is that in every town across the country, just about, there is an Acadiana Cares with the kind of infrastructure and the potential to build on all of that all across the country. I mean, all of this was put together by community that cared and loved their partners or their best friend or their brother or sister that was sick. And that energy that built all of that and drove all of that is the result. You can see it all over the country.
And it's beautiful to witness today. Yeah. It's grown into something and flourished into something so rich and powerful. And I guess as a follow-up, now I'm curious to know, how are you, after all these years, mentoring the next Claude Martin?
Well, we have a couple of them here. So, I mean, one of them, I have, one of my first persons I hired was Alton Thornton. Isaiah remembers Alton, and and he was hired as a case manager. When I got my job here, we already had staff in place. So the first person that I hired when there was an opening was Alton, and he's still here. He's the COO now, but he won't use that title. He calls himself the director of housing. But anyway.
And what type of spell have you put on Alton to keep him with you for this many years? Because as you know, he is immensely talented and smart. And I would have thought he would have cut you loose by now.
I've tried to, we've tried a couple of we've had like our housing authority executive director's position came up, but he loves working here. He says that every day. He says, I just love my job. I am excited to come to work every day. We have lots of things that we're doing, and it's exciting work that we're doing. And I think he's still part of that.
That's so excellent.
Yeah. And his specialty now is the housing. He kind of took over that whole drive. And so he's one of the leaders in the city as far as a housing advocate and stuff. He's on the board of directors for our homeless coalition. And he's taken a very leadership role in the community as far as housing goes for the whole community's housing issues.
We love that there's plenty more of you all around, Faith, that we can lead on.
You want too many more of me, but
let's circle back to Louisiana, Lafayette, and the ruralness of it. Yeah. So Claude, a lot of folks always ask, how can we reach rural communities? And they always want to know best practices. And people are always eager to share what's working in urban areas. Right. But the constant challenge, as you know, is trying to explain to folks how some of this stuff is never going to translate for rural communities. And as you know, I'm from one. So oftentimes I find myself telling the urban cities, that's a great program. That's a great social marketing campaign. That's a great tool you're using, but this is not going to fly in a place like Lafayette. How do you describe the ruralness of your community to folks who haven't lived there or visited there so that they can understand what it's truly like?
Let's see. Well, I can tell, it, just to let you know how rural it is, at least once a year, and thank God it's just once, maybe twice a year, we get a call from an emergency room in one of the rural towns, that they have someone living with HIV that's at the emergency room that are untreated, have not been treated. They have been basically are in the same condition people were in the mid 80s when we first started doing this work. And every time we, connect with them, get them into care, start working with them, they were living in a situation that they did not know how. They knew they were living with HIV, but they did not know how to explain to their community or their family why they were taking meds. And so they chose to not take meds or not treat their diagnosis because they couldn't figure out how to continue to get the support, and they were afraid that they would be put out or that they would not have the support of the family or the community where they were living. So they made a conscious choice to not take medicine because they didn't know how to explain it, is basically what most of it boils down to when we run into these things. Now, the great, wonderful thing about this is that once they start taking the meds that we have available today, it's there within 3 months, it's just like a miracle. But it's, when you think about what they endured, the years that it took for them to get to that crisis in the emergency room, and what they endured in the isolation and the loneliness that they must have felt, all getting through that. Now, usually, it never seems to be as bad as what they thought the reaction was going to be. But what we have here and the ability that we've created for housing here is that the beauty is that we can bring them here and they can live in our facility, because we have housing and we have a cafeteria, we have everything here, so we can get people out of those situations. But a lot of times, if we don't know about them, then we can't. Now, the state has been doing some really great work. At one time, we had about 200 people in this region, just in our region, that we knew were living with HIV but were not in care. Now, they have done some incredible work, and we've gotten that number down to probably somewhere around 50 people. So they've done some wonderful work in getting people into care. Another example I have for letting people know what it's like to be here is that when Louisiana had its very first female governor running for governor, which was very exciting for Louisiana, that Governor Blanco was from Lafayette. So this was her hometown, where, hometown would rally behind her, but she was a Democrat. And so she won, but she did not win Lafayette Parish, because we're so conservative and so Republican in this area that they wouldn't even vote for their hometown girl because she was a Democrat.
And what is striking about that is that, as you know, Claude, the Blancos, both her and her husband, they are huge figures in that community. Like, he was a vice president at the university that both you and I went to, the University of Louisiana, USL, prior to that. So he's a well-known figure there. He was a coach and then a part of the administration, and she was extraordinarily well-known. So the idea that she wouldn't carry that area handily really does tell you about some of the preconceived notions that people had and still have about the role of women, and how sometimes they will put politics above everything else. Right. Because in every other sphere of life, people would have gone to the mat for that entire family in Lafayette.
Yeah. And and that kind of stuff is in the work that we do here. We are probably one of the most funded nonprofits at the city of Lafayette. We apply for money for programs and for stuff that we're doing on our property, and we have been very successful in getting that funding. One, because the city knows that we're very responsible and we do what we say we're going to do. We run a really professional organization, but that wasn't where I was going with that. But with that, I know that we also have to be very neutral in the approach that we have, because if they like funding us, but if we get too vocal or we get too pushy with some, that could jeopardize. So I'm constantly walking this fine line about being an advocate and trying to get change to happen, but also not isolating or alienating Acadiana Cares from some of this political decision making, because we can't, it's always that fine line. Do we jeopardize some of the funding that we're getting for direct support for people, as opposed to trying to advocate or take a much more liberal stance on some of the things that are happening around here too. So it's challenging, not to be able to walk that fine line sometimes about taking a neutral stance sometimes, because you don't want to and those kind of things can happen. They don't have to be, obviously that they're happening, but those decisions are made by decision makers that have some pretty conservative ideas about things.
I guess I'm now curious. Yeah, I'm curious now how in the moment of those political wins, you're also navigating COVID and other epidemics going on. Has that impacted anything down in Acadiana?
Well,
Well,
yes.
not even like the pandemic, but have the politics around it, changed how care is received and preconceived notions of folks who need care.
We've taken a very strong stance on it. Right now, we have the staff has to either be vaccinated or they have to be tested every week to be able to work. And we lost a couple of employees because of that.
Sorry to hear that.
Huh?
I'm sorry to hear that.
Right. The testing part was what pushed. They said it was infringing on their rights for us to, I said, I don't care where you get tested, but you just have to get tested.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Claude. I don't understand how anyone who's working with people who are living with HIV or who might be living with HIV, I don't understand how you can expect to be in that care provision and not be vaccinated. Like, to me, that's
well,
beyond.
Wasn't really. None of these were frontline. They were, administration stuff. Some people. But even, we have a congregate setting here. We have people that live here. It's, even if we didn't have people with impaired immune systems, we, because we have these people that are living on the property. It's like I kept saying, we have to make sure that this home is safe for people that are living on the property. It's their home. We happen to just work here, but for 80 people, this is where their home is.
Absolutely.
It's been very, we've had some, I'm sure y'all have seen all this, we've had we have a new young mayor that has been, very controversial about COVID and stuff. It's just been, crazy stuff. With funding, a couple of, we have some of the stuff that's happened is that we've gotten all this COVID money that's come down, and you have some decision makers or politicians and stuff that think they can do anything they want with that money, and so they start, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and then people have to come back and tell them, you can't do that. This money is targeted and specifically the federal government has said this is what you use the money for. So it's caused lots of slowdowns in the funding and stuff. Like right now, we have $1 million for emergency housing that we formed a coalition with two other homeless groups. That was some of the COVID money that came to the city. And because they decided to use some of the money to fund some of their pet projects, the whole thing had to go back to HUD to be reviewed, and it slowed the whole thing down. And so, this thing was ready to go 6 months ago. But because of this, we have not been able to implement the program because of not understanding or thinking that your viewpoints are going to be able to override what the funders, the grantors are saying. So that's, just for us, that's some of the stuff we've experienced that I've seen it slow down because of attitudes and stuff about how government and all that should work, or how they don't know or they don't believe in government. So they think that they can just ignore it.
That's going to be an issue. Yeah.
Brew, I don't know if you had another question, but I wanted to squeeze this one in because we're coming up on our time with Claude. So we just have a few more for you, Claude, but I have to ask you about gay men because it's an important topic to me, to you, and to Varushab. Talk to us about the lives of gay men in your community, how they're doing. I want to particularly prep uptake among the community as best you can kind of tell from kind of where you sit. And since this was once kind of like the work that I was doing, how is our community doing in Lafayette?
Well, it's, since COVID, it's messed up. We feel very disconnected and all of that. What What I don't think that we're talking enough about is what I think is a epidemic of meth. And you don't like me to talk about this, but sex and the unmanageability of those two things together is creating really high numbers of syphilis infections and HIV infections within our community that I care very deeply about. But to me, those are some of the things that are driving this dual epidemic. And because of COVID, so many people have gone kind of not underground, but they're not as much community support where they can do events and things where they could be distracted maybe from some of the activity and stuff. So there's much more activity on one-on-ones and hookups and things like that I think they're not getting some of the support that you would get from more coming together in community. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah, it does, and that's unfortunate to hear. I will say this has been on NASTAD's radar. We're actually working on a 2-day virtual workshop intended for primarily CBOs, but some health departments as well, that touches on both meth, drug use, and gay men in particular, and particularly the mental health impact on them and on the folks that are working with them. So in other words, how are the folks that are doing this work with gay men dealing with the constant kind of burden that comes from seeing this and doing this without getting burned out or feeling like, they're taking on the toll of that? So we're actually focusing an entire TA meeting on this topic, on mental health and gay men and drug use. And meth was specifically called out in that agenda. So I'll make sure that you and your team and the folks in Louisiana receive the memo about that. I think that meeting's taking place later this fall in November.
Yeah. And just to say, other part of that too, Isaiah, is that I don't think that we're doing enough, and I think it's across the country, in understanding the healing that needs to happen for people that have been into the chemsex scene and stuff. There's this sexual healing. I mean, for people to be able to go back to, or to be able to heal and be able to have a healthy sex life and stuff after this takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of professionals to work with people, and that takes resources and stuff to be available to the community, and about talking about stuff that people are already so uncomfortable talking about that it's hard to even advocate for it, or for the individual to advocate for it, and even begin to put that knowledge out there into the community. I think there's some resistance too, and we need to start talking about that, because there's a lot of the guys in our community that are struggling with healing in these areas in their lives, and they have a very big challenge in trying to put their lives back together after these kinds of traumas that they've experienced.
All right. So we want to, really segue into two questions that we love to ask all of our presenters and all of our guests on Southern Steep. And this really comes down to fundamentals of the South. So the first question is, what do you love about the South? And the second question is, what do you want to see for the South? And so, Claude, I'm curious to hear from you on a very fundamental, organic level. What is it about the South that energizes you? What do you want to see for the South? And what do you love about the South?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest things I love about the South is we have something here called Who's Your Mama, Who's Your Daddy? It's that there's this connectedness that we have to community and to the people that put the community together. So we still, especially, when I think of the South, I still think of rural, not so much metropolitan. But so that whole business of where do you come from? What are you part of? This connectedness that we have I love about that. I love going, to the grocery store and running into people that I know at the grocery store. I mean, I have friends in the city that just hate that. They say, I like to be anonymous. I don't want anybody to know me. My little brother's that way. He lives in Fort Lauderdale. I don't want nobody to wave at me and tell me hello and know me. I love it. I love running into
We like to
people.
keep to ourselves.
Yes. And so I love running into people or seeing people I haven't seen in a while, going to things, and just visiting and talking to people and connecting like that. What I'd like to see for the South is, we struggle so much with resources in being able to bring equity to the people that live in this area too. It's always a challenge. And for people living with HIV, Ryan White and HOP sometimes are the only thing that's available to people in the rural areas, where in the more wealthy areas of the Northeast and in metropolitan areas, they have, foundations, and they have all this other money that's available for people that can qualify for things. But so much in these rural areas, there's just not the resources to bring equity compared to what other areas of the country are experiencing or have.
Yeah. I always say the main striking point for me is we want justice. That's what we want in the South.
Yeah. I mean, for here, if Isaiah knows, where Turkey Creek is, which is a little south of where he lives. If for me to get a client from Turkey Creek to the doctor here in Lafayette, it's cheaper for me to go and find a sale price on a flight from Lafayette to San Francisco round trip than it is to get somebody from Turkey Creek to Lafayette, which is kind of explains the equity, that we just don't have, there's no transportation systems, there's not any of that stuff here. So you have to either send people over there to get them and bring them back, and then bring them back and then come back to your house. It's, that's the kind of stuff that we experience in the rural areas here.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole podcast, Claude, on the transportation issues and the challenges that it presents for rural places in Louisiana and really all over the South.
I mean, Guatemala has better transit system than we have. I mean, really, they do. In Mexico and stuff, all those buses and all that, we don't even have that here. I mean, you can get all over the place in those Latin American countries compared to over here.
Absolutely the truth. I could talk to you all day. We will probably have you back at some point because I feel like we just scratched.
Yeah, let's have you back. Let's do this
again.
An
absolute treasure, a resource, and I'm glad that you are still doing this work with such passion. It's just great to see. And thank you. I can say this publicly. Thank you for helping to put me on such a great path and a great foundation. I really appreciate that and appreciate you, Claude.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you too. And I always say that you were one of the best employees we had.
Oh, you don't have to say that. Your check is already in the mail.
No, it's true. And I said, I can tell you this, that the one beautiful thing about Isaiah was that he worked and was responsible and did his work until the minute he walked out of the building. He didn't quit 2 weeks before and just watch the clock. He worked until the very last moment that he was paid to work here. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Lafayette means a lot to me. It's where I went to school. It's where a lot of my great friendships were forged. And so it's a special place for sure. So thanks for joining us on this podcast. We appreciate you, and good luck with all the work down there at Acadiana Cares in Lafayette, Louisiana. And the website is acadianacares.org.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I had fun. Great to see you.
Thank you, Claude. It's great to see you.
You too. Nice.
All right. Take care, Claude.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So, Varushab, I think this is your first episode that you've recorded, I think, correct? Or since we did the one with all those co-hosts in here?
It's the first one where I've been a co-pilot. Absolutely.
How does it feel?
Oh, I'm on cloud 8 and 9. I love the conversationality of this. I love where we can dive deep and also crack some jokes. I really love the vulnerability we're able to access here. And I definitely love that everyone here is down to have a good time and be serious when things get serious. So this is a wonderful way, I think, to talk about, honestly, so many things that come up in the South. And it's just a shame that we only have an hour to do it, because like you said, we really could talk about transportation for 2 hours or housing for another 2 hours. And, that's just the way it's been baked in. But we will continue doing this and talk more. So I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, and I'm very glad that Claude made time to come on. I worked with him more than 20 years ago now. One of the things I remember, and I was very young at the time, not so young anymore, but he was executive director. He was very passionate. He was the first one in and the last one to leave every day. So his commitment to the job was obvious. He was, smart as the whip. And he always came to work in denim jeans. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a leader like of his caliber do that. Mm-hmm. And I often thought, why? What is he trying to convey? What does this say about his leadership style? And I think what I took away from it was that, when Claude shared that story about how they used to work out of their trunks before they even had a space to work in, and they literally, that was the work before it became what it is now. I think for him, that remains the work. The idea that I would be doing this even if I were a volunteer, and seeing him in the jeans as the executive director doing that work from sun up to sundown, it really did convey, even back then, that the work was more important than the performance. You know what I mean, Rue?
Yes.
And so, and even talking to him today, I think he still has it. I still get from him that the work is way more important than the performative aspects of like being a leader. And so it's one of the great lessons that I took away from him that I think just says so much about his leadership style. And I think about how other leaders show up in spaces and how you can tell what their commitment is or isn't based on, some things.
What was so clear to me was his passion, right? Like, I think it touches on what you just said. The passion not just transcends the work that he does, but it transcends over into the community that he's serving, right? I think he's been doing this for so long because he loves his community. He loves Lafayette. He loves the people in it. He loves his siblings in Lafayette, as I would call them. And a leader is someone who doesn't lose that North Star. And for him, I think you were able to pick up on it and touch on it because he didn't ever change. He is the person who he has been this whole time when you met him and when we met him. And I think that shows why he's such a powerful force down there. That shows why he's a leader. I really can't wait to see what else he does.
Well, it was a pleasure to partner with you on your first outing. I thought you did a great job. So good luck teaming up with those other folks. I don't know, who knows how Nicole will show up.
I'm going to do my best.
That Bianca Ward.
She's a fun time. I'm wishing you luck there as well.
All right. I'm Isaiah Webster.
I'm Prashad Shah. This has been Southern Steep. Thank you so much for listening.